Welcome to the Optimalist podcast, where we examine just what it takes to ensure humans flourish in the age of AI. I'm Sarah, your host for this exploration of mindfulness, attention, focus, and motivation, all elements of human flourishing. So how do we cultivate them? Athea Davis is the Director of Social and Emotional Learning for a K-8 charter school district in Houston, Texas. She's a mindfulness educator, the author of Today's Going to be Awesomesauce, Daily Meditations for Youth, Parents, and Families, and she's the creator and host of the podcast Mindful Living with Athea Davis. Listen as Athea and I discuss modeling the things you want to teach, the connection between self-awareness, insecurity, and fear, and the idea that SEL and emotional intelligence are still seen as soft skills when we know they're just the opposite. All this and more in today's conversation. I just wanted to give a quick trigger warning here for this episode. Towards the beginning, Athea discusses a personal family story that deals with addiction and suicide, and I just wanted to give everyone a heads up now in case you want to skip ahead 5 or 6 minutes. Thanks for understanding, and now, on with the show.
I was going through a divorce. My former spouse struggled with depression and alcoholism. We had a child together. He was 4 at the time. He's now 17, ages me a little bit. And it was really hard going through that process, loving someone that struggled with this addiction. And I had never, I was not in education. This is my what I call my second career. Mm-hmm. And I'd never practiced yoga, mindfulness, was really resistant to it. And all the things that I knew in terms of coping with the stress of that time were not enough, which was mainly running. I've been a runner for most of my life, still am. And a friend suggested going to a yoga class. I finally went, and it was really impactful. It really made a difference for me, even just going that one time. And then I was super curious about this thing called yoga because I don't know how to describe it really, other than I just had an emotional connection to myself in a way that I had not experienced before. So I kept going, was super curious, and ultimately was curious how you teach these tools to kids, because I was going through this really hard thing, and it was, no doubt impacting my kiddo. And I wanted to know, just breaking up a family, that's hard, and wanted to know how to teach these tools to kids. And so that was my initial start. And then I really dove in a lot deeper once I became a certified yoga teacher, and studied with many teachers and studied how to teach these practices to kids. And then it's like one tragedy after another. After my marriage was, complete in terms of having the divorce, my former spouse struggled even more. And I would say, I think it was a year or so after our divorce, he took his own life. And going through those tragedies back to back was just really debilitating. It really was ungrounding. I went through my own bouts of struggling with mental health and depression. And in that time, I wrote my first book, Today's Going to be Awesomesauce, Daily Meditations for Youth, Parents, and Families. So it was really just going through this incredible challenge, this traumatizing event that had me keep walking this organic path of curiosity of how do these practices help one heal, help kids that are struggling with other challenges, maybe not exactly like a divorce or a suicide, but other things in their life that they're having a hard time, coping with. And so I guess it's been over a decade later that I've been doing this work.
The last thing I was thinking as you finished up with that part of your story is the concept of I guess, modeling and what you've been doing and what you have done and turned your, I guess you could call it your career or your whole trajectory. Because I'm thinking of even elements of what you do outside of your physical day-to-day job, which is stuff like creating podcast content for people, just even putting out, even if they don't seem huge to you, but putting out small messages very regularly on something like Twitter. The things that you have made routine that all kind of connect back to this purpose that you found is really, and not just like a purpose that you found, but something that you had found yourself for your own life. And then you created routines around it that built mindfulness and changed your way of thinking, all of these things that you knew you had to build into your life and make regular. And so the thing that I'm thinking about is you really are modeling that transformation of self, I think, for people, with not just quietly going about doing this for yourself, but then also putting it out there, the things that you're learning, like openly talking to people about them, asking questions so that other people can, think about how it applies to their own lives. I'm thinking about how when I scroll through some of your tweets and, they're just like these little nice little provoking gems that usually apply to something that I'm thinking about at that moment. So all of those pieces, I think, kind of put together a portrait of someone who was so transformed by what you learned about yourself and about how to live intentionally through trauma, and even outside of those experiences, that you have cultivated a life that shows that and kind of, I think, is meant to pull other people into that experience. And so the question that comes from that is that long explanation. I'm in one part of that, I'm just commending you for that kind of intentionality around what you're doing. And then the other part of that is a question about bringing, as far as the trauma aspect of it, is it difficult to teach, whether it's adults or children, is it difficult to teach people these techniques and the way of life you want them to be exposed to outside of the portrait of dealing with trauma? Is it difficult for people to latch on to and incorporate mindfulness or SEL techniques when they're not just immediately faced with a problem? How do you handle that kind of a situation?
I think it depends. These practices certainly bring up, but when I say practices, that could be anything from any contemplative practices or self-inquiry practice. It could be, any kind of mindfulness, meditation, yoga, prayer, anything that's going to have you go inward. So, yeah, it just depends. I think people are where they are, and sometimes they connect and sometimes they don't. And the nature of the practices bring up resistance anyway, whether you think you're interested or you're not. So there's always that barrier internally. Like, you can name anything as a barrier. I don't have time. Why does this matter to me? There are more important things. All of these things are little resistances that come up within ourselves. So I think it just depends. I really do. I think, I don't know, I can't quote any research on this, but I have talked to a lot of people over the years on my own podcast and just teaching thousands of people over the years, young people and adults, leaders, teachers, etc., parents, that many do have an opening when you go through a challenging experience. There's some kind of break in this identity of who we think we are and where we want to go. So there's something about this break in the reality of what we think the world is and who we are. And some of us can go into that break with a little curiosity and intention and love. Some of us don't. Like, that can be really hard and destabilizing for others. So it doesn't necessarily mean that because you go through challenge, you're going to have this opening inside. And I think Ruby talks about that, the poet. I can't remember the poem right now, though. Or maybe it was the Dalai Lama, or maybe they both said something.
It could have been both.
But
it sounds like they maybe both did. Yeah.
Yeah. So it just really depends. There's so many factors that play into why one would lean into a tragedy and say, yeah, I'm going to do this, and, really, look into myself and transform some things. And for others, it can be really destabilizing.
And I also think that even for the people that you're explaining would maybe, be a little bit more willing to jump in head on and face whatever it is that they're facing. And I do think, because I've been on both sides of that situation myself, and I think even even when you are outwardly being like, yeah, let's do this, there is still there's something that's transforming. You're just a little bit closer to the starting line, I think, than people who are still a little bit timid or afraid or turning away from it. And I do think, and I'm wondering how you would interpret this, a lot of what you're describing is that journey towards better and better self-awareness. That is kind of how I'm thinking about whether it's because there's an opening because you've faced something really traumatic. It could be for some people, every day is little struggles that wind up opening new parts of yourselves. And I know I go through little lengths of time where things seem really like hard every day. And so every little thing that I conquer or face and have to make a decision about on my own can feel like an open, like, oh, I did that. Like, oh, cool. I didn't think I could do that. And so sometimes it's big and sometimes it's little, but all of those moments and decisions, I think, have us faced with like you said before so beautifully, like, who am I right now? Who was I before? Like, what am I becoming? What am I doing in this present moment? Putting the past aside, putting the future aside, and focusing on what is right in front of me, and being aware of that is, I think, really scary for a lot of people. I think probably most people, because it brings them face to face with exactly what you were talking about with who you are, and you have to deal with that. Mm-hmm. And I think the journey to self-awareness, and getting better at paying attention is something that is easy to dismiss, but once you're on it, the rewards kind of start to open up, and then it's hard to ignore them. That's kind of how I'm thinking about what you're saying. Would you interpret that differently? Or I don't know how you think about self-awareness as part of all of this work.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly some of us are naturally more self-aware than others. We go through different experiences that can impact our self-awareness. And no doubt that these practices help us, increase our self-awareness through the nature of what they do, paying attention to what's going on internally. I feel like certainly the opportunity is there. Just because I may be practicing some kind of contemplative practice doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to have this awesome self-awareness. There are other factors, involved, your environment, whether you can put yourself in a position to really ask some hard questions of yourself. We were talking about identity a minute ago, and that can be a really hard thing to dissolve if you have this identity and that has kept you in a limiting belief in some way. And it perhaps has put you in this blind spot, so you don't have certain awareness about certain things. And that's where community and other like-minded individuals can play an important role to helping you along that path and journey of self-awareness and awakening, so you can discover that for yourself. But certainly you have to have that commitment yourself. There has to be some work from your side of wanting to do that, and I think about, how we were talking about earlier, humans don't like to change. It's very hard for us to want to be uncomfortable. Before we typically take any step towards change, we have to feel it inside of our own body, like we have to embody something that doesn't feel quite right, not in alignment, doesn't feel good, before we take that next step. And sometimes it happens that we're in a conversation with a friend and they introduce the fact that they're trying meditation, and you are just curious that day, and you might try it, and you might have an epiphany at that moment and a link, and it looks that way. So I think it just varies, in terms of, and I can't remember the original question. It had something to do with self-awareness.
You're explaining it very well.
Yeah.
I was just musing about the fact that what you had been describing before sounded a lot to me like a kind of journey towards self-awareness. And I think self-awareness is how we start a lot of this stuff, any path towards mindful living and intentionality that an individual is doing purposely. And really it's what you do throughout your whole life, but you can't really start it or continue it well without being almost consistently aware of not only who you are right now in the present, but how you're changing, how you react to things. And so many people are, I think, afraid of that, is what I was saying. I was just kind of asking, I was asking, I think about this every day. This is what I do. I think about, and write about, like, as part of the work we do with this podcast and with Engageable, is thinking about how self-awareness impacts what we pay attention to.
Yeah. I mean, it's everything. I think what you're saying is it's super important because, I mean, certainly developmentally, if we look at the development of, when we're young to adolescent to young adult to adult, developmentally, obviously, like, we're increasing our self-awareness over time to a certain degree, but the lens in which we look through the world comes from our disposition, the culture in which we were raised, the environment, so many factors, where we live, what we're consuming. And so we then go out into the world and we just say, this is just what it is.
Right.
And then we meet other people and we realize, oh, wait, this isn't what it is. I mean, anybody in a relationship intimately knows how difficult these clashes can be.
Mm-hmm.
And then you start wondering, oh, wait, well, I thought this was the right way. But wait, no, I'm right over here. And so, it takes curiosity. It takes, like, wanting to know why we do what we do and behave the way we behave. You have to have that sense of curiosity. I mean, you can certainly live your life and not have it. I surmise that might be really difficult.
Yeah.
It might be really difficult to be around someone that might not have that curiosity or is not interested in increasing a healthy dose of it, because that curiosity is key for that self-awareness to develop.
Yes. And I certainly have people in my life or have been in my life in the past that especially once I really dove into my own really long journey of self-awareness, when you are faced with physically in the same room with people like you're describing, it's almost like you can feel a physical barrier of, you can feel that energy is completely different. And you can't, I don't know, there's something there, like, cause it carries into just like the actual awareness carries into everything that you do and how you are, and you don't even have to try. It just happens. The same thing happens for the opposite. I think when you're not curious, it plays out in a lot of the things that you do and the people that you're around, the way you communicate, like all of these little, they might feel like silent decisions that we make with ourselves of how we walk into every day. They really affect everything that we do.
I think it's important to have a huge dose of humility, because it's not like you get to some point and you're like, I'm self-aware, I'm fully self-actualized.
Right.
I made it to the top of the mountain. And that's not what it is. I think that can be a really dangerous interpretation. And I think I've seen that out in the, like, oh, I'm more self-aware than you. Look, let me point the finger at you. My toxic traits aren't as, quote unquote bad as your toxic. Like everybody's on, they are, like I was saying at the beginning, they are where they are. Some people, are more, self-aware than others. And that's where I feel like humility, compassion, and empathy really come into, into understanding each other, just to remember that that's okay. If you find yourself with perhaps someone that is not as reflective or that is maybe more resistant, it's a teaching in and of itself about you and what that says about, are you trying to fix the person, or, it's an opportunity for you to learn to practice some of these things, the humility, the compassion, etc.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to comment on that you said before, you were talking about part of awareness is like recognizing when something is out of alignment, like in your life or in your body. Sometimes you can usually feel it. Like something in the connection between what you're doing and what you're feeling is not right. And I think that a lot of what keeps people in resistance about this, because that also takes curiosity, right? And I do feel like we have invented so many ways for us to kind of cover this up and push away those feelings. Like something's a little off, and then like you've recognized it. Yes, you're aware of it, but so many of us don't take the next step of thinking like, well, what is it and why, which is the curiosity you're describing. And instead we wind up, and now at this point, it sounds kind of ridiculously cliche, but we do wind up just scrolling through Instagram instead. Like something doesn't feel right. Let me, I'm going to watch like 5 movies this weekend. And we satiate that in the moment and don't let ourselves be in our bodies and actually explore what it is that could completely transform the way we're feeling. And I do think that those distractions, we kind of create those distractions from our own, that could possibly be intense emotions. And I don't know that there's, even if we, technology aside, I don't know if there's a way to completely solve that. It takes great courage to face that, I think, and not turn away from it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it takes great courage. And I think that's part of our human condition, that we struggle with that and these sometimes unconscious things that may be embedded in our body, but we're not quite aware of them in our minds. Or maybe we are, and maybe there is a resistance. We are humans that don't really feel in the society that we live in. Mark Brackett, who wrote Permission to Feel, talks about this. We don't know. We're so disconnected from our mind and body. We don't know what things are. Many of us don't even know that we have this voice in our head, or how, what anxiety feels like in our body. There are still people discovering that are, older adults, like, oh, wow, when my hands sweat or I'm shaking, that could be anxiety. I never knew that. This is not common information that, unless you're steeped in it, that people know about. I certainly, before, I'll say in the first chapter of my life, pre all of this journey and tragedy and contemplative practices, I didn't really pay attention to what I was feeling on such a deep level, and that changed because of the nature of the practices that I was engaged with, because that's what you do. You're paying attention to how this posture feels in the body. Where do you, notice tension or no tension, or what are you noticing in your thoughts? And you sit down and you try to meditate and your mind goes 100,000 miles an hour. I think some of that is understanding yourself, right? And like, that's the cool thing about the journey, is that you can notice these things like, oh, wow, look, I'm doing this thing again. That's so interesting. Why am I doing that? What is it serving me? And is there some deeper thing that I'm trying to fulfill? Because there's no easy question or answer. It's why am I scrolling on, social media? Maybe I don't know. Do I need to feel like I need to connect with someone? Maybe you have a high need in that moment. It hasn't been really defined. And when you take that healthy dose of curiosity and you realize, oh my God, look what I'm doing. Because sometimes it's so unconscious, we don't know what we're doing. We've, flip open an app like 100 times or something in a day. And we're like, what the heck? And then it might be, well, I need some community. I need some connection. It's not like, oh, the light goes off. I'm aware. I know what feeling I have. And now I know what feeling. I'm going to label it. And I have this tool. It's really a journey in itself of asking, what is this thing I'm doing serving? And then you go on like this little internal journey and discover that. So, I mean, I think it's fascinating, to discover those things about yourself, because when you do, then you shed that light of awareness, and then you can take action to change that, or to understand what you're needing, or to create more connection in your relationships, to then share what you're needing or what you need to stop doing to have more fulfillment and ease and peace of mind, or whatever it is that you're looking for.
I had pulled a few tweets that you recently, like I said at the top, you're pretty prolific and intentional in just putting little messages out there. Some of them are short, but they are kind of impactful if you think about them as a part of your day. And there was one I pulled from recent weeks was about SEL and emotional intelligence as soft skills. And the idea that we should be thinking about them differently now that they're so, it's being so widely publicized how coveted those skills are in the world and, in the workplace, yes, but also, anywhere. And how, I don't know if if we're just being made aware now of how important they are, like our cultural and social habits, like we're talking about, that are really so heavily impacted by our technology use. Like if now the world is kind of revealing, like it's revealing how important those skills are and how intentional you have to be about cultivating them and making them better. So I'm not sure like how that's being really revealed to us in that way, but the comment that you had made on Twitter was about there being soft skills and how can we, kind of bring those into the light as not using that phrase anymore. Being a director of social and emotional learning, how do you see this kind of playing out in the school system or education system over the next year, 5 years and beyond, where we are seeing this huge call? How do we make that understanding real, that this is it's not just a shift that is momentary, but it's really a shift towards understanding that calling something soft skills like really makes it sound like it's nice to have, but you're not, you can kind of get away without having it. How do we get
it's
that?
Not required.
Yeah, those mindsets. Like, I feel like that phrase just needs to be disappearing altogether. What does it take to make people understand that this is really, they're really important life skills. Maybe we'll never get there. I don't know. But what do you think? Like, how do you grapple with this?
I'm more hopeful than we'll never get there. I remember tweeting that, and I really wanted to hone in on the fact that exactly what you were saying, that soft skills, just because we can't typically see them versus like hard skills where that you might be able to, have something tangible from that, so to speak, that they're actually foundational. They're not separate from, like, our brains love to organize. We love to create categories, and they can be very useful when we're analyzing things. And we tend to forget, actually, these skills exist hand in hand. It's like when we're talking about academics and social and emotional learning as if they existed separately.
Yeah.
That's insane.
I know.
That so much of our learning experience is happening. Like it's all happening in our, in our brains, and these things are deeply interconnected. Emotions drive learning. And because we typically, and I say we widely here, it could be parents or leaders, anybody in education. Typically you don't learn how these skills go hand in hand. It's just like, okay, you compartmentalize. I'm going to focus on math, and I'm going to focus on science, and this other stuff, it's, on this side, it doesn't really matter. As long as they get that, these skills that my standards require and you get the grade, then we're good. We've forgotten like the human in the process and how that human is coming to understand this information that you're sharing with them. And so is there hope? Absolutely. Is it difficult? Yes. I mean, there's still struggle with, even I think about throughout the years doing this work and how so many people question why this matters. But I think what I have seen is that when you share the practices, you share the research, you model this in your own life, it becomes so, it's not easy, but easier for others, including students, to connect to why this is important. Because the nature of what it is you're going to have to discover it for yourself. It's not like, I mean, you can certainly be inspired by this conversation or a book that talks about it. That certainly can be an entry point for anybody, and or an access point, as I like to say. But it's something you have to discover for yourself. And I think that's why, like, having these experiential moments in the classroom or your business or at home provide you that container to have that moment of discovery. You may not have it every time, but you're increasing your ability to have those moments by just engaging in the practices. So I would definitely recommend to anybody that is in this work and feels like they're defeated to, tune into the community is like you have here on the Opulence podcast, and continue, putting your spark in action, because it really does matter, to remember that you're planting seeds. You're not trying to change anybody. Right. I think that's where we can get frustrated. Like, I'm trying to change this and it's not working. And I think that you've got to change the mindset. It's like, you can only change yourself. You cannot change other people, but what you can do is show up as a representation of what it is to be on the journey and to model these practices and to openly share with others what's possible for themselves. And I think that's where the real connection is made. And you keep showing up, you keep showing the research, you keep talking about it. And just recently, some research came out showing that an article in Education Week showing that there was a positive correlation of students that had higher scores in reading and math also had higher scores in SEL. And students that had lower scores in reading and math had lower SEL scores. I think the more that you can share information like this, you open doorways for others that might say, that's interesting. I want to know more. So I would just suggest, keep planting seeds. If you're thinking about fixing anything, that's not a really healthy place to be at all. And when you come from that mindset space that you can only change yourself and that you can offer some incredible, education practices and guidance and how and why that these two go hand in hand, I think you are making that transformational difference in the classroom and in education by planting those seeds.
And I do think that we're still at this point pretty early in adapting this widely, that people don't quite see that that the part of SEL, or, maybe it's calling it social emotional learning, that throws people off sometimes. I don't know that people really see that a big part of that are so many of the things that they look for in an academic setting, or in, a setting where you're you have to collaborate or coordinate or play sports on a team or be a part of a group or learn how to talk or work one-on-one with people. I don't know that people really truly get that part of that, like curiosity and persistence and resilience and all of those things that we know that we value. They're all connected, and they're part of that experience of being aware and paying attention. And all of that is a practice that we have to build a routine around and understand affects all the other parts of what we want to do. But all of these things are connected. And I keep going into this in the last couple of weeks, I keep saying this phrase of like, or awareness before academics going into this next year. Like, what would it be like if we all adapted that mindset even a little bit and got made this commitment to thinking of all of this stuff and kind of meditating on it and how we can get incrementally better going into the school year before we even attempt to think about what the academic part of that world is. How much would it shift if we all were doing that a little bit?
Well, certainly, I think these skills amplify. That's what they really amplify what you're able to do, taking on any cognitive load, whatever that is. Whether you're, reading, you're writing, you're doing some creative work, you're amplifying your ability. You're amplifying and optimizing your ability to do cognitively demanding tasks.
Yes,
and that is what. To not have that, you're stuck because you're trying to, teach this cognitively demanding task. And some people might have a natural aptitude for that. That's great. And then others will struggle. And the tools, whether it's mindfulness and social emotional learning are they go hand in hand, but mindfulness isn't just it's not the only social emotional learning tool, but it is an important piece of it. And it helps amplify and optimize a person's ability to fully show up in these, very challenging cognitive tasks. And I think, again, the more that we're talking about it and sharing the research that's coming out about that, the more that we have others listening, and the more that, whatever you're doing in your campus, organization, or home, that you are that power of one that, knocks that huge domino down at the end. This one little spark in action caused the 100-pound domino in the back of the line to fall over, to understand, to listen. So it matters what you do. Sometimes it might not feel that way because maybe you're in an environment where all the voices are against you. This doesn't matter. Why are we even doing this? That's where you really need to, lean into your own resilience and your own courage, and your own why to keep up with this work. Because when you're doing that authentically and in alignment with your own values and truths, you're really making that difference for someone else. And, I think it's just part of living an awesome life, you have that capacity to make a difference for so many by planting those seeds. And, if you're struggling somewhere where you want to throw your hands up and it's normal and natural, doing this type of work, it's okay. Remember, you're in good company. You listen to things like this, you read books, you go back into your practices, but you lean on those stories where you know that difference was made. And that kind of gets you the fuel that you need to keep going.
That's such good advice there at the end. It was almost like you knew I was winding up to the end of this part of the conversation, but that's such a great way to leave people thinking, whether you're in a position or some sort of leadership position in a school setting that you are faced with making these decisions, or you are looking to adapt. I think so many people that also listen to this are people that don't have any sort of formal program in place in their district, and maybe they are that person of one that is championing championing that. I can never say that word. And so they do the work in these little pockets or do what they can. There's a teacher, I think she's a second grade teacher who I talked to a few months ago, not on this podcast, but separately. And there's nothing in her elementary school where she works that is a formal program, but she just started teaching, like doing little snippets of yoga with her own second graders. And now I think she did that for like 2 or 3 months and just kind of made it these little micro routines throughout their week. And then that kind of spread how it was helping her students do X, Y, and Z. And then now she's like literally running yoga routine, I think it's called, for the entire elementary school. And so
that's awesome.
That's crazy. Like, and all she did was do the one thing that she knew that works in little bits and built it into the lives of her one class. And then that had a ripple effect of what they saw her doing.
Exactly. And I think that is what I think oftentimes we feel like we have to, do some big, great thing. Like, how am I going to do this? And it just really starts small. I think about, in my own journey, I really just wanted tools for myself and for my son so we could get through something that was really, really hard. And I just followed my curiosity and discovered how powerful these tools were, and then started teaching, kids in yoga studios or family yoga. And one thing led to another. And I think we just have to start with something.
Right.
And then you just go with that. Like, that makes a difference. Oftentimes we think it has to be big and sparkly and all of that. It just matters exactly in that story you shared with that second grade teacher. Just start with what you can do and be that power of one, because it really does make a big difference.
Yeah. And you don't even have to think ahead of, in that instance, is a great example, because you don't even have to think of ahead of like, where is this going to go? What can I make this into? Although that might be somewhere in the back of your mind. Really, all you have to think about is, what's in front of you, that present moment. These are the 25 kids I see every day. Here's what I see them facing. I'm going to just pick a few things that we're going to do and see what happens. And if they respond, which I almost never hear stories like that where the people that they're working with are not responding well. Like, there's always this effect of like, how can we get more of this? And she did it in a way, like, that's a great example of just a way that was not, she's not trying to change people, like you said, just did the thing that she knew how to do. And then that's a way that's the embodiment of modeling, right? Modeling the life that that people are capable of. At this kind of winding down part of the show, what I like to do is ask people to share as much or as little as you want, but anything that you are reading or watching or listening to, and listening can be interpreted as podcast type listening or music, anything that you want to share with us that you are consuming from outside of, it could be outside of the work world or inside, unrelated, anything at all, but that is going into your brain that kind of forms a more complete picture of who you are as a person.
Sure. I lately have been listening to the conversations that Lex Friedman has been having in Jerusalem. Those are really interesting, and highly recommend, anyone that likes learning to listen to those conversations. Love the Lex Friedman podcast. It's really great. Something that I just finished reading was a book that I bought my son. He's 17, very entrepreneurial. Did his little business the last couple of years, is thinking about doing something else. But the book is called The $100 Startup. It's Reinvent the Way You Make a Living, Do What You Love, and Create a New Future. And the author, and I'm going to mispronounce his last name, but it's Chris Gilliboy, maybe? Okay. Sorry, Chris, if I totally messed that up. But I actually bought this book in Ryan Holiday's bookstore in Bastrop, Texas.
Oh, cool.
he has a bookstore called The Front Porch, and a friend of mine and I love, small shop bookstores. And I was looking for a gift, and so I bought this book for my kiddo, and I wanted to read what I was giving him. So I had finally just read the book, and it was really great. So anybody, interested in knowing how to take their idea and put it out into the world, that's a great book. And speaking of Ryan Holiday, I love his book, The Daily Stoic, his meditation book. I have that on my little table in my sitting area where I read. And then I read so many different things at one time.
Me too.
I'm also reading it's called Afghanistan, A Cultural and Political History, Thomas Barfield. A lot of my current students, we have Pashto speaking families that come from Afghanistan. And I just really wanted to learn more about the culture and the history to really get a grasp on the community in which I'm serving currently. So those are the books that I've been reading, and that's what I've been listening to.
Those are, I think, all more wonderful examples of them, especially even the last one you mentioned about Afghanistan is like all of that is wonderful examples of modeling for people as well. And not just the part of your job, I think, that we would expect, but other parts of mindful living and being in full awareness as much as you can of what you're working on, what's around you, the people you communicate with. So that's kind of cool. And then that brings us to the very last question that we end with, which is if you were to give people advice or recommendation on maybe a way that you would say is a method of practicing attention or getting better at being attentive or being present, what would you say to people? Like, do you know something that works for you as far as getting yourself to a place of attentiveness where you feel like you know that you are there in that moment? How would you tell people that to kind of practice this more in their lives?
Two things pop into my head, which was mindful walking and mindful eating. So I love mindful walking because it requires no training. You just get up, get outside, and plus you're doing a couple of really great things for yourself by getting outside, getting some sun, and you don't have to walk far, but you just simply walk and you just notice, the trees, the birds, the car, whatever. So your eyes are just, gently moving around, kind of noticing what's right in your, in your space, in your own personal bubble space, or you can go even in your periphery. And so that's a really great practice to help practice and train your attention that I really love. And mindful eating is another one. I'm one that I really don't like, unless I'm connecting with someone, I don't typically watch things when I'm eating because I like to sit down and really enjoy the texture, the flavors, all of it. So I highly recommend that. If you don't have at least one meal in your day where you're mindfully eating, you're not reading, you're not on your phone, you're not listening to anything, you're not talking to anyone, you're just in your quiet space and you're eating and enjoying your food, that's another way to really, hone your attention and train your attention. So I really like those two because we do those every day. So it's not like we're adding on any other time. And so I like to suggest those.
I love that. Especially, both of them. I haven't had anybody talk in detail about mindful eating here in a while. So it's good to hear you bring that up. But anything where you are, both of those examples are anything where you require yourself to really kind of go, it is a kind of going inward because you are only allowing yourself to pay attention to what you're doing at that moment. You'd be surprised if even that is a practice, right? Doing that a few times a week, either of those things. Before we go, let's tell people where they can find you. Is there anything that you want people to know about your presence on social media, where you want them to connect, how you like to connect, and any work or projects that you have going on that you would like people to find, you can let us know where that is.
Yeah, I think in some respects, I'm closing a chapter and starting a new chapter. So I can't share much about that yet, but you can find me on social media at Athea Davis. So that's AtheaDavis. That's on all social media handles, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, etc., TikTok, at Athea Davis. Would love to connect with you. And you can also tune into my podcast, Mindful Living with Athea Davis, and that would be on any of your favorite podcast platforms. So those would be two ways you can connect with me.
Awesome. Well, it was so great to finally be able to connect with you. I know I've been looking forward to talking to you for quite some time. So I'm so glad we were able to do this. And I'm hoping to find some more ways for us to connect over the coming months as I grow this little community and podcast and newsletter and all the things that come with it. So thank you. Thank you so much for being a part of this collaboration, I would say.
Thank you, Sarah. It's been awesome.
Many thanks to Athea for telling us her story. I particularly love her perspective that mindfulness is the root of all action. It's something I've been thinking about ever since we spoke, and I hope it's resonating with you all as well. You can let us know by leaving a comment on Substack, a review in Apple Podcasts, and you can reach me on Twitter at scandela9. You can listen and subscribe to the Optimalist podcast wherever you love listening to great podcasts. New episodes are released every Wednesday, and links to all of these resources are available in the show notes. The Optimalist podcast is brought to you by Engageable, the only app that gives you the mindful pulse you need for better attention. And it's free. Create an account today at getengageable.com or by downloading Engageable on any iOS or Android device. You can also follow us at Get Engageable on Twitter and Instagram. Thanks for listening to The Optimalist. I'll be back next week with a new conversation. Stay engaged.